all of that. Yes. Sure. Amen. Um, so after the updates, then I want to give you some of our budget results. The second quarter of the fiscal year ended in end of March, and we'll let you know where we are there against the budget. I'd like to take the bulk of the meeting to talk to have Eric speak. Eric spoke at our um, January meeting, and he's going to really address three issues. He's going to talk a little bit about rate making and how it's done within a utility. He's going to talk about affordability, which he's one of the industry's leaders in affordability, and he's going to talk about customer assistance programs, which certainly something we need here in Pritchard and Chickasaw. Please, as any meeting, interrupt me if you have any questions. That's really the important part of these meetings is to get your feedback. So let me just start with some updates. As part of the water consent order, we were required to have an asset management study done by the end of May. That study will tell us what the capital requirements are for the system for the next 20 years, which is absolutely critical as we plan for the future. The field work for that study has been completed, and now they're doing a lot of the back office work. We intend at the next meeting, they will present the asset management plan. So that's a huge meeting to attend. And we'll find out whether we're talking about $100 million we have to spend over the next 20 years, $150 million, whatever the number is, and where it needs to be spent. The other study that is ongoing right now is a source of supply study. As you know, we're taking a look at three potential sources of supply for Pritchard and Chickasaw. One is continuing on with the Moss purchased water. Another one is a surface water supply, and the third one is a groundwater supply. That study has actually progressed pretty far. We don't have all the information yet, but it appears that a surface water supply is just not feasible, both from a yield perspective and from a cost perspective. But the good news is that a groundwater supply is feasible. Right now, the projection is that they'd have to drill about 10 wells and at about 500 gallons a minute each. And I'm giving you stuff that's right off the presses, so this may slightly change. The wells need to be spaced pretty far apart because they can't have one well influence the other. There are low levels of iron and manganese in these wells, so there will be some removal of iron and manganese. It's not a lot, but if you wash your clothes, you're going to find some staining. It's at that level, so there will be some treatment there. Right now, we're working up the costs of the wells and the treatment, both the capital costs and the operating costs, and that also will be presented at the next meetings. So two critical presentations at the next meeting: source of supply and asset management. Yeah.
And I know it's not this month's topic, so I apologize. But it also gives you a hybrid to move over to just depleting what you're buying from somebody else while you're building wells, so you can convert over a long time. Is that fair?
Well, I guess the question is, what's the most cost-effective way to do it?
Well, there's cost effective and how much capital we have.
R-
So if we relied on capital, we can move towards that solution, get away from having water.
Absolutely. Although, if you ended up with centralized treatment,
Yeah.
which probably is going to be the most cost-effective way to do it, then it kind of doesn't quite work. So that's when we're looking at what they call wellhead treatment, where you treat it individually at the wells, which would be 10 really small treatment plants, versus centralized treatment. I'm guessing that centralized treatment is going to win, and if that wins out, then you really don't phase. Understand right now that the money that's sitting with the bond trustee, the projects that were originally designated, one of which was the about $15 million for a groundwater project.
I was just gonna bring that up was how does that correlate with looked at it because we already know what that repayment looks like, the term on it, versus us having to say, come up with another capital.
Well, clearly, if we can get grant funds, like I was able to get, that's going to be a whole lot cheaper than getting it from the bond trustee. So we're going to look for the cheapest capital possible. The bottom line is we're going to need to spend a whole lot more money than even the bond trustee is holding right now. So the whole idea is spend the cheapest capital first and then work your way down to the most expensive capital. And obviously, any grant funds we get, would be the cheapest, and believe me, we're working hard on trying to, as you know, trying to find some grant money.
That's for the wells, right? If we decide to go with that.
What was the question?
I say it was a statement that that would be for the wells project if we decide to go with that. If I'm not mistaken, initially the money that was with Synovia was for
There was about $15 million under the Synovus bond offering that was to go toward wells.
yes. What I'm saying, sir, to the best of my knowledge, the bond money originally was for wells.
One portion of it was.
One portion
Yes,
was for wells.
that's correct.
So what I'm saying is this: is that that money, how much it is left now from the money that they
There's
did not spend?
There's about $23 million left of funds that the bond trustee is holding. About 15 million of that was allocated to groundwater. Now, but the question is that really the most cost-effective way to spend that money? Because what you have to understand, and I think I said this in an earlier meeting, it's not only the cost of the wells and the cost of the treatment, but we're required under regulation to have a fully reliable supply, which would mean we need to maintain the interconnections with Mawes, and Mawes has to have enough excess capacity to supply us under an emergency. So there is going to be some cost with respect to that standby fee for Mawes.
Okay, so my point is we're still exploring that.
Yes.
That's on the table.
Yeah, we will present this at the next advisory council meeting, and hopefully we'll be far enough along with the economic analysis to make a recommendation.
So again, to my point, as you present next week, given that the wells have to be parked and you're gonna have to consolidate them and treat it, if there's an interim step to do a third or a half of those wells when you have a redundant system with groundwater and purchased water until we move forward potentially go all groundwater or not, depending on what.
Well, it all comes down what the incremental cost of that is compared to the cost of buying Mawes water, which is exactly the analysis we're doing. Okay? Okay. Okay, so that's asset management and source supply. The meter project, which I haven't talked about at all, there was kind of a gap there when not a whole lot was getting done. But we have awarded the final contracts to do the industrial and the commercial part of the metering project. Those are bigger meters that you have to put into vaults, and so we're actually moving forward with that. We've awarded the contract, and I don't know what the debt. It should be done by the end of the year, but I don't have the specific. It's a bigger meter. Yeah, so your residential meters are typically 3/4 inch meters. Your commercial industrials are larger. Well, uh, well, if you well, that's easy enough to prove. If you probably have a 3/4 inch meter. Yeah. Okay. Have you talked to anybody at the utility about it? Yeah. Well, so obviously, the larger meter you have, even if you're not using any water, the higher your bill is going to be. So the larger the meter you have, irregardless of how much water you use, the bill is going to be higher. So if you have the wrong size meter on your bill, then I suggest you go get it changed because your water bill will go down. Okay, 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 okay. Um, yeah. Hmm. So by law, every residential meter we installed has a backflow on it. So they currently do, the ones we installed. So on the residential side, it's covered. On the industrial and commercial side, they're much larger, more expensive backflow preventers, and that's what the program is really focused on. Because what we're really concerned about is an industrial application that's using some chemicals that would potentially back. That's where it's really critical. But you will not get a letter of your resident about your backflow preventer. It's just commercial and industrial.
Jim. Folks can't hear.
Can y'all hear now? No.
It's not amplifying here, it's live stream. It's not amplifying. It's up for live stream.
Yeah.
I'll take care of it.
Okay. Uh,
The question is, the money that we're spending for the commercial meters, to install the commercial meters, will that take care of the backflow?
the commercial and industrial customers are responsible for their own backflows because they're unique for each one, and annually they're responsible for testing it and sending us the test results to make sure it works. So there's no cost for the utility for those backflow preventers. Okay.
And my question is, sir, with the meters, did the backflow come with the new meters that we have now?
Yes. All of the residential meters are equipped with backflow, and that's required by the state of Alabama.
And all the residential meters are in.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right now we're focused on commercial and industrial. What we do is we send out a letter, and basically it has two things. One is kind of a survey that kind of you fill out, and it kind of directs you to whether you need one and what it needs to be. In other words, if you're a commercial application that you're a church, but you don't use anything but the water for the bathrooms, we're not going to ask you to have a backflow preventer. But if you're a car wash or you're something else, it's totally different. Okay. So what we do is we're sending out a letter. You know, as I said, we just put the program together. Should have been done 10 years ago, but we just put it together. So we send out the questionnaire. We have to get it back. Okay. We review it. Okay, and determine whether the backflow preventer needs to be done, and then I'll be honest with you, we don't have the manpower right now to physically go out there and see it gets in. I just don't have the manpower to do it. But annually, we send out a letter that we require to have a certified backflow preventer tester send us back the results to make sure it still works. So therefore, that inspector better be inspecting a backflow preventer that's been installed. So that's kind of our way to know it's installed. And we get it back and determine that it's there and that it works. But the program's just starting, this month, and we'll see how it goes. If I had a few more people, we'd go out in the field and inspect them. I don't have the people right now to do it. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about the grant money we got. So we got $5.8 million of grant funds from ADEM this year. It's focused on 4 projects. The biggest project this year is our tanks. We have 5 tanks in the system right now. At the end of the day, we only need 4 of them. And so those 4 tanks, we'll be making improvements to them, which will help with the public health. There's some public health issues associated with those tanks. And then we will be painting all of those tanks. Well, for instance, I just give you an example. The overflow pipes from the tanks go pipe directly into the storm sewers, okay? The way you properly design a tank is you have to have an air break. In other words, the water would flow out of the tank, and then there'd be a space where the water flows. So if water were to flow back from the sewer line, it wouldn't get back into the water. There's a gap. Okay, we don't have that on our tanks. There's also the EPA inspection report, which talked about mildew and mold and all those types of things on the tanks. This will take care of all that. We're going to be sandblasting the tanks. What you actually see is what they call a shroud around these tanks, because you don't want most of these tanks have old lead paint on them. They haven't been painted in a long time, so we need to capture the lead so it doesn't go across the neighborhoods. And so it's a big curtain that goes around the tank. You sandblast it, and then your drop hits the curtain and drops down. And we'll be doing both the interior and exterior. We'll be painting the tanks. We'll be doing the piping modifications and cleaning up the tanks for the public health issues. And then we'll be putting control valves where the water comes in from Mawes. And so as the tank level drops, the valve opens up and brings more water in. And as the level goes up, the valve closes down. And that keeps the tanks from overflowing and maintains pressure in the system. These are controls that you should have had years ago, but we'll get them in. We'll get them in now. So that project, we're moving forward at lightning speed. We hope to be bidding that project in June. And then we hope to award a contract in August. So this year, toward the end of this year, you'll see activities on those 4 tanks. And you'll probably see toward the end of this year or the beginning of next year, the standpipe that's at the office come down. That's so low it serves no purpose at all, and it's actually a liability on the system right now. Yes? Okay, well, let me talk about the 3rd project, okay? Okay, so that's the tank. So we actually have design and construction money for this year for that project. Second project is designing some improvements at one of our wastewater treatment plants. You know, we're also under a consent order on wastewater. So the Morris plant, it deals with what we call the headworks of the plant. When the sewage comes in, you have to screen it, and you have a bar rack that takes the big stuff out and screens that take the little stuff out and pumps and all that. So this is kind of the first phase of improvements at the wastewater plant. That design contract has been awarded, and that'll be designed sometime completed in this first quarter of next year, and then we'll go into construction. The 3rd project we have is replacing 9 miles of pipe in the Lovejoy Loop, the oldest pipe we have in the town. It's not only replacing, but we have some 1 and 2 inch lines that are going to go up to 6 inches to support fire flows and things such as that. So it's not only supply, but it's also assist in fire flow. I'm negotiating the final terms of that contract right now. That design will be awarded this month. I suspect that pipe will start going in first to second quarter of next year. But that's 9 miles of pipe, Lovejoy Loop, somewhat in the center of town. So that contract is for like $900,000 to do the design and bidding. Okay, so the idea here is we're going to spend $5.8 million this year. Then we're going back to ADEM and getting about another $15 million that will cover the construction of these 4 projects. Okay, we've had multiple meetings with them. That'll actually be money from the BIL, which is called Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That's where we think that money is going to come from.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, as I understand it, one of the biggest issues with Flint was that they changed the Flint water system in Flint, Michigan. That they changed
Mhm.
And because they changed the water source, the coating on the pipes started to leach into the water, and it ended up contaminating the water.
Yeah,
All right, so
that's very oversimplified.
yeah,
Okay, okay. I spent 5 years on that project, so.
so if we're talking about doing the groundwater,
Uh-huh.
which would be switching our water source,
Mhm.
if we do that after we install these pipes,
S-
would
s-
that be?
the Flint, the switching the water source, what happened was they switched the water source to a treatment plant that had never been run for 30 years, and they treated the water improperly. That's not going to happen here. Okay. Uh, yeah, what they did is they took water out of the Flint River, which was very corrosive, and didn't treat it properly. We're going to be taking almost pristine water out of the ground, taking a little bit of iron and manganese out of it. We are going to we are going to put chemicals in it to adjust the acidity or the pH, making sure it's properly treated. But there's no problems. The biggest issue you have when you have two sources is if you ever run them simultaneously, then there's some point in the system where they meet, and you have to just make sure they're compatible when they meet. So there has to be compatibility, but both sources, Moz is great water, and the groundwater be great water, and you're not going to have that problem. Okay, I guarantee you that. Yeah. Um,
I know, sir,
yeah.
I know that you're still working, you know, and identifying, uh, projects and things, but I haven't heard anything, and I don't know whether it's even on the radar, so that's why I'm asking the question, on, Whistler Street and, Whistler and Patricia Street. That has been a problem for the last 20 or 30 years, typically, you know, about that raw sewage and everything. Every time it rains, it happens. The sewage is running down the street. The water board even sold the house, that property there. Excuse me. Uh-huh. They bought, the water board bought that house across the road.
Yeah.
And, is that on your agenda at all?
So I'm going to be real frank and honest with you here. So what you're going to hear on the asset management study next month is they're going to talk to you the level of spend that we need to do because of the age and condition of the infrastructure, but they're not going to identify specific projects. What we need to do is we identified the Lovejoy Loop to do first because it's just the oldest pipe and it has the most leaks of everything. But let's say the magic number is $10 million a year we need to spend on buried infrastructure on the water and wastewater side. Then we need to decide where the best place to do it. And this first study is only going to determine how big the number is, but the next step is to determine where best to spend it. Now, what they will tell you on the asset management study, they're, and I'm getting way beyond where we need to be, but that's just me. So what they're going to do is they're going to look at the age of the pipe in the ground. They're going to look at the soil conditions around that pipe because that can lead to problems. But most importantly, they're going to look at what the risk of what happens if that pipe fails. So based on the age, the soil conditions, the pressure in the pipe, and the risk if it fails, they're going to come up with some recommendations about you ought to do this spot first because it's next to the hospital. You ought to do this next to the hospital. We may decide we're okay that with the school. We want to do it somewhere else. So they're doing it at kind of a 50,000 foot level. We need to take it down to the 20,000 foot level and come up with specific projects.
You said at the beginning there's 5 tanks and you only need 4.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think I heard you say the tank that we're going to use is the one downtown.
Yeah.
And instead of just capping it, you're cap it and remove it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it cheaper just to cap it, or is it a?
It's a liability as it just rusts and goes away. I also, again, I think I said this at the last meeting, one of the 4 tanks we're going to keep is undersized and needs to be larger. But we've kind of decided that it does the job right now, and we have better. It's going to cost like $4 or $5 million to put the larger tank in, and we have better places to spend that money right now. We've gotten by with what we got, so we're going to stay with it. We just need to. Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Okay, so we got we got the tank project, we got the wastewater treatment plant Morris project, we got the Lovejoy Loop, the 9 miles of pipe that we're putting in, which should help with the leakage. And then the last project we're having, and I think I've talked about this several times, and it's a real concern of the state as well. We operate blind, the Pritchard Water System. You know, we have 30 pumping stations on the wastewater side. We don't know whether they're running or not running. There's no information coming back to a central location. We operate the treatment plants. We leave at 5 o'clock. We come down back the next morning, and with our fingers crossed, hoping that everything's running well. So the last what Grover Street? Yeah, yeah. No. There's two wastewater facilities. Yeah. There's the Morris. What's the actual location? I don't know the street. I'll be honest with you, I don't know the street. I've been at both facilities a lot. I don't even know the street, but there's two wastewater treatment plants. Okay. So we're putting in what we call SCADA. It's SCADA. It stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. Basically, what it is it's monitoring and controlling what happens at each station, so that we can bring everything to a laptop and the operators can know what's going on. This is standard operating procedure for water and wastewater systems, and we're like decades behind in this. And it was so important that even though this isn't under the consent order, ADEM put it high on their priority list, and we did as well. So they're the 4 projects. Then we hope to get $15 million beginning in 2025 and proceed with the construction of these 4 projects, with the requirement that all of the projects need to be done by the end of 2026, because that's when the funding runs out. Okay? Yeah. So, and we should be able to, I mean, we're fast tracking everything, so we ought to be able to finish everything by 2026. Now, that doesn't mean we're stopping at these 4 projects. You know, we're out there looking for more money to do more things, but at least we're moving in the right direction. Yes. So what we will do is we are going to bring the information back to a central location, but more importantly, it all could come back to a laptop. So we will have operators on call 24/7 who will have those laptops, and then they get called in, you know, based upon whether it's a leak or whether it's this, or whether we call in different people or even contractors. But you're right, you actually have to have 24/7 monitoring. The other thing we have is we have an off-hour call center. And so what also will happen if the operator doesn't respond, then the information from the SCADA system will go to the off-hour call center, who are also manned 24/7, that could then get back in touch with us. So yeah, you always have to have redundancy on these sorts of things. That's, I'm sure you know. It's part of it. The training is part of the contract, and what's also very important on any of this instrumentation and control stuff is you have to constantly what we call calibrate it. In other words, if you ignore it, then you'll start getting false signals, and then when you get false signals, then you just stop ignoring the signals because you think they're always false. So you have to really stay on top of things when you do this. I know, but so what? I mean, that's a great question, because one of the things you're going to see when we price up these wells, you know, you can just put a little metal shack around a well and leave it at that, and it's really cheap. I would not do that here. We're putting block buildings with fences and cameras and all of that, because that's our primary source of supply if we do it. So it's going to be pretty expensive, but it's the right way to do things. And we probably need to go to some of our pumping stations right now and do exactly the same thing. Good news is that all of our pumping stations are on the wastewater side. Now, we have problems on the wastewater side, but it doesn't directly impact public health as far as drinking water. But well stations and things like that, critical. You do exactly what we said. it's critical infrastructure, and I actually served on the president's Critical Infrastructure Council, and it's not only the physical concern about infrastructure, but the SCADA getting into the systems, and it's the cyber stuff that's really scary. Yeah. Yeah. Kate? I have offered to them if they can come and talk to me ever they want, and they've chosen not to do that. I mean, I've talked to a couple of the board members. Yeah, I've had conversations with a couple of the board members. The board chair has not come to talk to me. No. Of course, you know that we're in the Supreme Court right now. Yeah, I don't know. It certainly could be. I mean, I welcome anybody coming talking. I would not have made the choice for what? I certainly would have. I certainly would have. I did my due diligence. I certainly would have. Okay, and by the way, they did a fantastic job. They're the ones that helped get us the grant money at the state. Pritchard Water Board, no, they rejected the Pritchard Water Board's application. Pritchard Water Board put in a request for $100 million, and it was immediately rejected. There's a process you have to go through. You have to do it the right way. And we developed preliminary engineering reports for all the projects and a bunch of other things that needed to be done. You just can't go in and say, give me $100 million. You have to tell them what it's for, what it's going to cost, what the schedule is, all those sorts of things, which we did. All I know is they think it's going to come. They have not committed the money yet. All they did is tell me it's from the BIL. I don't know what portion of that is coming from. Yeah. Okay.
My question is, what about, because I've got several calls on this $20 million grant. I was informed that the UNETA is seeking, and I want to know that will that money, if it is awarded, will it have, where would it be used in terms of the system? Because you named some very, very, very important things that need to be done.
Well, 5.8 million is the money that's already been allocated for this year for the 4 projects I've talked about, 1 in construction, 3 in design. The $15 million that we're going to get next year has not been officially allocated yet, but has kind of been promised, and that will go for the construction of the remaining 3 projects. Yeah, though that has. I'd like to get some of that money, but I'm not getting any of that money.
Okay. From what I can understand, I didn't go to the meeting, I didn't know anything about the meeting. But anyway, from what I can understand, it's money that will be granted to the system, the water system.
No.
Okay. Well, what is it for?
So that was funding that the community association went after to acquisition 1,200 acres that has the creek alongside it, and it's for the improvement of the creek, of that 3 miles of creek on Chickasaw Creek.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So along with that.
Well,
A little bit into that, a little bit
yeah.
that may not
Yeah,
identify.
that's where it's in that area.
Okay. All right.
No, sir.
Does it do what? Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm glad you brought up that point. We obviously, I read the newspapers like everybody else and talk to people like everybody else, and they were taking shots at Pritchard's water and wastewater system as one of the reasons that they were having problems. So we contacted the head of the board of the university, and specifically said, "What are your problems and what are your needs for the future?" They got back to me and told me what their needs are. So part of the asset management study, we're putting together a project that will deliver the 50% increase in flow that they're going to need for the future. So they can't point at the water and wastewater system and saying, you're the reason, that we need to leave Pritchard.
And what we Matter did was, in that situation, was said, as a CEO, we'll raise our hands if we need to go and help protect, because the money that Mr. Young is talking about through build, the bipartisan infrastructure money, a community-based organization has to be attached to be able to draw down that money. And so we raised that, it's the bipartisan infrastructure
Law.
money that's coming down from the federal government. All right, and so we contacted Mr. Young and said, let's work together. If we need to help to apply for for their wastewater, we'll do that. And then they started communicating, and I think that there's a plan now being constructed.
Yeah, I went back to the head of the university and told them that as part of our asset management program, we'll put together a project that will meet their current and future wastewater needs.
And when you were talking about the university, you were talking about the University
Really?
of Mobile. You were talking about the University of Mobile.
Yes. Yeah.
In regards to them wanting to pull away
Yeah.
from the city of Pritchard.
Yeah. They initially said it was because of water and wastewater, although I went back and looked at complaints. We haven't gotten a whole lot. We haven't gotten complaints from them. So I really don't think it was water, wastewater.
I think, well,
But they do have future needs. Yeah.
That's understood. They're a university.
Right.
They're supposed to have things.
Right, and so they're saying in those plans, in order for them to expand, they have to expand their wastewater capacity. And they were saying that Pritchard couldn't do it, but Mr. Young was not aware of it. So we made Mr. Young aware of it, and he's now included in his asset management plan to be able to do it.
But Pritchard Water was aware of it, because this is not the first time that this
I
came.
don't know that part.
I do.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm looking forward. I'm not looking backwards.
I would like to finish.
Yeah.
I would like to finish because this is very important to the community and everything that goes through. And I know Clifford can validate this. Everything, to the best of my knowledge, that goes through Mobile University has to come through the city council, through the city of Pritchard. They have to sign off on it, including the water and everything else. So I know that had been discussed before in terms of the city, the Pritchard Water and Sewer not being able to supply them with with the necessary water that they need. But this is all a part of de-annexation, so we don't want to get it twisted. And the citizens refuse to get it twisted because we already know about it, but we are trying to find out about this money. Mr. Young keep us informed, transparency in regards to what he's doing. But we're trying to find out about this money that will come in, this $20 million, that it looks like it's a strong possibility of it's coming in if it gets the right support and all. And we're just trying to find out what is going on with that money if it comes in, and what is the correlation between that 20 million and what Mr. Young is doing.
They're two totally different things. Two totally different things. Okay, listen. I want to leave time for the really important presentation here from Eric. So let me move on a little bit here. What I'd like to talk about next, Jim, you have the handouts, is some financial stuff, and I want to talk you through this slowly here. What I'm going to give you here is a summary But I'm going to put on the Fixed Pritchard Water website much more detailed budget information. So this is just general information on revenue and expenses and things like that. But there'll be a line by line item that'll be put on Fixed Pritchard Water. So March 31 is the end of our second quarter, which means we're 6 months into our fiscal year. So it's a good time to take a look at the budget. We looked at it at the end of the first quarter. Now we're going to look at it at the end of the second quarter. So let me talk you through this sheet. The reason I gave you a sheet because I got some criticism last time when I want to put stuff on the whiteboard. So this is something you can walk away with, okay? So what we have here on the far left-hand column was the original budget that was put together by the board. Jim, do you have any extras here for some of the people? So what they said is we have a balanced budget, which honestly was just fiction. That's all I can say is fiction. So we redid the budget, and this is the budget that I presented to you about 3 or 4 months ago. And we thought revenue was going to be only 12 million, and expenses were actually going to be closer to 18 million. And the real drivers there, the reason the revenue went down is there were just some wrong assumptions made by the board on where the revenue would end up. And the reason the expenses went up, a lot of that had to do with they were just ignoring some of the expenses that they owed to the trustees and other people. The franchise fees, for instance, for Pritchard wasn't even in the budget, things like that. So we have a budget. So we have this new budget of 12 million revenue and 18 million expenses, which has a hole in it of $5.4 million. Okay? So the next column is, if you take that budget, you take that annual budget and divide it by 2. Now, I know that's very simple because real budgets, you do a cash, the third column from the middle column. The middle column is basically the second column from the left side is just divided by 2, okay? And actually, it's not too bad on a water system like Pritchard. You have some communities where in the summertime, huge amounts of water are used, and in the wintertime, it's different. In Pritchard, the interesting fact is, in the wintertime, there's so many breaks that the water usage is a whole lot different than it is in the summertime. But that's here nor there. So third column is dividing the second column by 2, okay? And then the fourth column is actually what we spent through the first 6 months of the year. The 6,744,000 is the revenue coming in, and the 7,530,000 is the actual expenses. So we have a 6-month budget in the middle column, and then we have a 6-month actual in the column next to the last on the right-hand side. So the right-hand column is what we call the variance. How far off are we in our new budget? So on the revenue side, we were off by $376,000. Basically, we got $376,000 more revenue than we thought we were going to get when we did the new budget. So we took a look at that, where that revenue is coming in. And interestingly enough, it's almost all residential. And so we went back and said, why is that? Well, if you think about the receiver order and you think about what we could do for collections, for the first quarter of the year and even into the second quarter, we weren't allowed to threaten anybody with shutoffs, okay, because we had this rule in the receiver order. We had the 60-day rule and the 45-day rule, okay? We're beyond that now, okay? So now people are coming under payment plans, things. We're not shutting a whole lot of people off, but people are coming in with payment plans and beginning to pay. So the revenue actually on the residential side went up a little bit higher than we thought it was going to be, which is a really, really good thing. On the expense side, we thought we were going to have $9.1 million of expenses through the first half of the year, but we only had $7.5 million. So you're saying, wow, what happened there? Well, the problem I have when you have a deficit like this, you have a cash flow problem. In other words, you can't pay all the bills. So I had to stop paying somebody. So who did I stop paying? I stopped paying the bond trustee. Okay, so if you look at the footnote on the bottom of there, it says for the first 6 months of the year, I didn't pay them $1.7 million that I owed them. So the reality of the situation, I underspent the budget by almost 1.6, but 1.7 of that was money that I didn't pay the trustees. So really what we're saying is It's not a pretty budget, but the new budget's pretty close to what it should be. And so that means at the end of the year, if we were paying the trustee all we were supposed to pay, we actually would have about a $5 million problem with our budget. At the end of the day, we may only have a $1 million, $2 million problem if I don't pay the trustee. I'm still going to have problems paying all the bills, but it's not going to be as bad. So that's not a good thing. Ultimately, we're going to have to pay the bond trustee. So we're just pushing the problem further into the future, but it's the only thing I can do to pay all the bills right now. Mm-hmm.
What were they?
I'll have to get. I don't have them off the top of my head.
This is a projected budget for 23-24.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah.
Right. But you project based on what you.
Well, the
Right. Right. So what I'm trying to figure is where were we in 22?
well the thing you have to understand on the revenue side is you've had a major rate increase between 22 and 23. So you don't really look at the numbers. You have to look at volumes being used and the cost per volume because the rates have gone up. You just can't move the numbers over with a sizable rate increase that went in place in November of 23. Oh, I can provide it. Which is exactly how we developed the budget. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we had some challenges on some unique challenges in Pritchard. We don't have a capital budget, okay? So, which is very unique to a utility, which is a capital intensive business. So the problem we have is you have a pump that breaks down, okay? You can't have capital dollars to replace that pump. So you go and you bring in somebody who brings in a temporary diesel pump. So you have the maintenance fees associated with diesel pump, and then you're filling up the tanks every other day with diesel fuel. So, if you take a look where we've overrun on the budget is very high on a lot of the maintenance line items. That's probably the biggest problem that we have with respect to projections. With a capital budget, it would look a whole lot different. Oh, absolutely. No problem at all. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Well, but let me. I will provide all the information that you need. But let me just warn you that, for instance, one of the problems we had with the board's revenue projections is, one, they had the rate increase starting at the wrong time. But more importantly, they assumed a collection rate of 100%. They assumed everybody was going to pay 100% of their bills. That is just absurd. And so we actually, when we took the revenue down to 12 million, it was because we used a reasonable collection rate. And so there's a lot of moving parts. So I'm just warning you when you look at the old numbers against the new numbers, but I'm happy to talk anybody through them. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Kate. Right. Right. I've never stayed there. I stay. You want to go? I stay at the Holiday Inn Express in Saraland. I know. and I get a free breakfast. My expenses are on fixed pressured water. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But we are working with an $18 million expense budget. So okay. Any other questions on budget? So here's the ask. You want to see the 22 budget? Is that what I got from everybody? 22 actuals? Okay. Okay. And then I'm going to post a more detailed 6 month performance line item by line item on fixed pressured water, both revenue and expenses. Okay?
And I think what takeaway you should be lost today is once we start to get some capital, we'll be able to now defer expenses and revenue.
Yeah.
Appreciate that capital over a longer period of time. That will help the curve of the expenses come down. You just haven't had that ability to do so.
All right. For years.
Future budget will be more exciting to me to see how we're able to stop wasting short-term money
Right.
and capitalize or amortize.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that's important, and we'll probably talk about a little bit next week, is when we talk about our own source of supply. So we're going to have to build a treatment plant that's somewhere around 4.5 million gallons a day, because that's what the demand of the system is, with leakage on top of it. Okay. As we put in new pipe, the leakage will reduce that number, and all of that excess capacity we have is available for growth, which is a really, really good thing. But you have to do it that way because you can't stop the leakage day one. So we have to build the plant big enough for day one, but you have growth built into it, which is a good thing. We rolled that into the source of supply study that we're doing right now. About 1,000 feet. I don't. What's the definite? When I say they can't be next to each other, they have to be about 1,000 feet apart, because it's not like they have to be across town from each other. Okay. Okay, you've heard enough from me today. So I brought Eric back, and Eric's going to talk probably about three really important things. One is I wanted to talk a little bit about rates, generally how you make rates for utilities. Secondly, affordability, and third, a customer assistance program. So, Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you. It's good to be back. First off, I stayed at the Fairfield last night.
Which was more expensive than the Holly Inn Express.
I had no idea, but as John said, I'm here to talk a little bit about rates. I know that the rates are a concern, and they should be here. And I'm also going to talk about just sort of your burdens relative to kind of everybody else in the state, what you're seeing nationally, where you're at, and how maybe we could look at options for relieving some of those burdens. And then a little bit about, and some of the options for relieving the burdens are a customer assistance program, for example, and some potential changes in rate design. And then really try to take a step towards looking at what is a long-term sustainable solutions. And I've got some information about what other has been the experience in the industry of other systems that are in crisis. And I will say, you're in crisis. And so it's important to think about what has worked elsewhere. So that's kind of what I want to try to get through. There are some key messages that I'm going to keep coming back to over and over again. Rates must recover the cost of service. The stuff that you're hearing from John about going and getting grant money here, grant money there, and so forth, that's not a sustainable way of financing a water and sewer system. You have a natural monopoly. And so natural monopolies in the United States, whether it's gas, water, electric, and so forth, use rates to pay for the cost of providing services. Your rates don't come close. Not even close. So there are a couple of things that can happen. The costs have got to come down, rates have got to go up, or you got to be able to have growth in the revenues, in the customer base. That's how you're gonna. Those are the ways of being able to get out of this predicament, or you consolidate and be in a position where you can take advantage of the economies of scale. That is how water and wastewater systems, and frankly, all utilities are able to deliver services in a relatively cost-effective manner. They can realize the benefits of economies of scale. The Pritchard water system doesn't have those economies of scale, and so you are handicapped. So rates have got to recover cost of service. I'll walk you through a little bit about how rate making is done in the water and wastewater industry. It's nothing too all that complicated, but you are in trouble there. Yes, ma'am. I have. I'm involved in one right now, and another one right now. In Guam, for example, they're at about 50% water loss. So I have to I do work in Guam. That's just one example. Lots of the territories have some of those similar problems. Yes, you have a terrible water loss problem. One of your important things to do is be able to reduce your water losses. Unfortunately, requires a lot of capital. And you don't have rates now that are even recovering your O&M expenditures, right? Right now, you're underwater. Pardon the pun.
Yeah, take a look at the sheets I gave you in the last one. We had $5 million hole in our budget.
You got a $5 million hole in your budget now. But importantly, and one of the things that John is doing by way of Band-Aid is John is going out and trying to get basically free money in the form of grants. That's not a sustainable way of running a utility. So the hole is like that $5 million plus a level of revenue generation that will support capital spending, because you got to spend money on capital. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So what rate, what percentage are we bringing in to address the cost to be able to? Your rates right now. So one of the things is we can't answer that question until John gets some of these studies done that will tell you what the capital side is. But if you're just trying to cover the O&M, you're talking about in excess of a 25% rate increase. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get to. At this point, the citizens are paying a high rate now. Mm-hmm. Really high. So if we're talking about an increase, it's really bad. It's really bad. And I'm going to show you how bad. Now, I understand to stop the payment, increase the payment, we need to fix the infrastructure. Right. So is that the way we're headed? Try and fix the infrastructure.
Let me take a shot at that. So when I came here, the first thing I said, I'm not going to do a rate increase. I can't do a rate increase. Why can't I do a rate increase? Because as he will tell you, rates have to be based on the cost of service. I don't know what Pritchard Water is going to look like 6 months from now. I don't know what the capital spend requirements are for Pritchard right now. I will when I get the asset management study done. So sometime later this year, we're actually going to do a rate study and determine what it should be. But it's going to be, what it should be is going to be driven very much by the capital requirements and the structure of the utility moving forward. Does MAWS play a role or doesn't MAWS play a role? He talked about economies of scale. That's economies of scale. Okay? So I don't have all the information I need to do it. But I can tell you, as Eric just said, if we staying forward status quo, it would be a big rate increase. Yeah.
Trustees pay me, yes.
The bond trustee.
I tell you what, give me a little bit of time. Let me just walk through some of the stuff because I think I'm going to answer some of the questions. I will get back to your questions. Okay? I think hopefully we can get a little bit more, at least have some information out there that I can reference to in answering your questions. So I'm not trying to dodge. I just want to provide a little bit of foundation here. So rates are supposed to recover cost of service. Costs of service involve lots of different things. We'll go with that, with what that is. Your rates today, relative to other people in Alabama, relative to other people in the United States, are really high.
Mhm.
They're really high for communities that have more economic base than you do here. So you have two huge problems when it comes to your bill burden. Your rates are high and your income levels are low. And that makes for a really, really, really difficult situation. John and I both have worked in some of the most impoverished communities in the country. And your situation is as difficult as we've seen anywhere. Okay? Whether it's Detroit, whether it's Flint, on down the road. So I want to give you a sense for that, what that is, and why I think you're in a situation of crisis. And so crisis means that you're going to have to do some things on a short-term basis and some things on a long-term basis. Much of what John is focused on is trying to put studies in place, to take actions in place, to develop a plan that works for the long term. One of the things that I want to talk to you also about is that there is the concern of what are we going to do about people today who can't pay their water bills, right? Because everything that John is working on takes time. We have both been in these efforts, and one of the things is they take a long time to figure out what the systems need and to put in place the changes, the fundamental changes that need to be made in order to get to sustainability. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. And so it's important to have a long-term perspective, to have a plan that enables you to get out of this mess. But at the same time, we also have to worry about what's happening every day that a customer gets a bill and doesn't know what to do. And so that's what I want to talk to you about. So let's talk a little bit about water rate making, water and wastewater rate making. It is a big testimony to how big a nerd I am, is that I have spent 30 plus years doing water and wastewater rate making. I've helped write these manuals of practice by the industry associations. It is a kind of an arcane art, but it's something that has some basic principles that I think everybody can understand. The basic rate making objectives for water, wastewater, frankly, electric, gas, any utility out there is full cost recovery. Why is that? Is because these services are not funded through taxes in most cases. There's no other funding sources for this. There is an occasional grants that may be provided by the state or the federal governments. But for the most part, there is the expectation that when you run a natural monopoly, when you run a business that is an essential service that people have to have, you should be able to run a service where the rates pay for the cost of service, right? So that's fundamental, and frankly, where we have problems here in Pritchard. There's other rate making objectives as well. People have to budget to pay for their water bill and their sewer bills and so forth. And so you don't want a lot of bouncing around of what the bills are. So some revenue stability, some approaches to doing that. You should try to make sure that you're doing things as efficiently as possible, because nobody gets angrier than when they basically see that they're having to pay for inefficiencies and to pay for something that they have to survive. Right? So it is an obligation on the part of utilities to try to be as efficient as possible to deliver so that their rates, their cost of service are what is really needed to deliver life essential services. And then you want to make sure that they're understandable, and you want to make sure that they're legally defensible. You don't want to spend all your time in court. All those sorts of things cost money. When I talk about cost of service, you've gotten a sense from what John has talked about. We got a source of supply. We're evaluating groundwater versus surface water. We're looking at pipe replacements. We're looking at meter replacements. There's a lot of stuff that is involved in running a water or running a wastewater system. The rates have got to cover all of these costs. These costs basically are for all these types of functions, and they all get back and embedded into the budget. So the budget that John talked to you about basically is a budget that only covers number one, O&M expenses. You don't have any money budgeted for paying capital. And the water and wastewater is the most capital intensive of all of the utilities, more so than electric, more so than gas. It represents some of the largest investments in a community can make. And so when you haven't spent money, when you haven't invested capital, when you haven't done the reinvestment, you're really, really in trouble. So that's those are the costs of service on the water side. On the wastewater side, it's a similar story. It's some different functions. It's a different types of treatment. It's collecting the sewage. It's managing the biosolids and so forth. But at the end of the day, you have to have a financial plan. First, the starting point of a rate-making process is a financial plan where the annual revenue is that which was required to cover the costs. So this whole thing about cost of service analysis, what John mentioned, is something that's going to be happening later in the year, is really just about trying to figure out, well, how should the rates be structured? Rates that will recover the cost of providing services. This is doing these cost allocations and so forth. All that is about is explains why rates sometimes are lower, a different rate for residential versus commercial versus industrial customers. It's because they cost different amounts to provide the services. Residential customers typically peak higher, and so that they probably pay a bit more because they're responsible for some of the storage in systems. Industrial wastewater customers may pay more per gallon because the sewage that they discharge is stronger and harder to treat and therefore more costly to treat. I wouldn't even worry too much about the cost allocation process. Yes, that's how we do rates, but at the end of the day, the starting point is where we got a crisis here in Pritchard. And then there are different ways of designing rates. I'll speak a little bit about that in a minute, but you've got these challenges. Full cost recovery, rate revenues are currently inadequate to cover even O&M, and you've got collections issues. And on the capital side, really the only money that's coming in on the capital is through grants that just can't be relied on a going forward basis. You get a different federal administration, and it could be a different story, a much different story. Here in Pritchard, you also have some significant issues. Water losses that are biblical. I mean, they are really, really high. They're much higher than what you see. They are much higher than what you see as the objective for most water and wastewater systems. Getting a control on your water losses is going to go a long way towards improving your operating efficiencies and lowering the operating costs. But unfortunately, it requires a lot of investment to do that. It requires a lot of investment, especially in systems that are older and have not had adequate investment as they've gone along. So when you defer reinvestment in the system, you invite a bigger and bigger problem. Another big thing is in terms of both on the operating side and on the capital side is Pritchard is a relatively small system. You don't enjoy the economies of scale that other systems do. And that is a huge, huge factor in managing costs in water and wastewater systems. That's how you can have a relatively low cost for years and years and years, and how, frankly, lots of other systems have substantially lower rates than you do. Another challenge you have is that most water and wastewater systems, especially when they are faced with lumpy investments, they got to do some things, maybe invest $10 million a year for however many years, but then have to do a treatment plant upgrade or something else. They will debt finance those sorts of lumpy investments so they don't have to increase rates a bunch in order to be able to fund a major investment. That only happens if you have access to the capital markets. By defaulting on the bond issue, you basically do not have access to the capital markets for a while. And it is hard, believe me, it is really hard to get back access to the capital markets. The biggest example is right down the road here for you. Jefferson County was declared bankruptcy back in 2012, 2013. We just got back into the capital market. Just were able to refinance their $1.5 billion of debt on better terms. They've recovered. Took 10 years, 15 years. So your decisions today are about the legacy you leave for your children and your grandchildren, because you all are going to have to basically be dealing with ugly financial problems in this utility, probably for most of your natural lives. Okay, so what are some things going to be done in terms of rate making? Two basic things. One is the structure of the rates and how you look at it. If you look at, for example, Atlanta or Jefferson County's rates, they have some significant differences. They employ inclining block rate structures that try to make sure that the amounts necessary for basic human health and sanitary needs are affordable for most customers. Here, that's difficult for a couple of reasons. There's a concern about revenue generation. When you rely more on volumetric charges, it becomes more volatile. And so one of the reasons why you have the big, relatively higher base charges is to try to promote revenue stability. And your collections issues and your billing systems, you really need to have clarity and confidence in your billing systems and the analytics around your billing in order to be able to make a rate change, because you cannot invite the danger of missing a revenue forecast. So something to look at maybe on a longer term basis. Perhaps more immediately, recognizing the problems, and we'll talk about the extent of the problems in a second, is some form of customer assistance program. Unfortunately, obviously, if you're already underwater in terms of O&M expenses, funding it through utility revenues is kind of problematic. One thing I would ask you is, are there opportunities to get philanthropic assistance for your customer base? I think we can design a customer assistance program that provides some important potential benefits to your customers in the greatest need. But there isn't any money immediately identifiable that's available. John can't go out and get a grant for it because it's considered operating expenses. In Detroit, for example, before Flint, I spent a lot of time talking to the Mott Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, the Joyce Foundation, and others who were concerned about water shutoffs and about water affordability. There's even something called that came out of that called the Human Utility. That's a crowdsourcing effort to provide relief for low-income customers in the Detroit area, and it's being spread to a couple other places. I'm trying to reach out to them for Pritchard. But probably the most logical way of trying to render relief to customers who can't pay their bills today is to look in this Mobile region and ask who can help. Because again, the notion of people not being able to afford something that is essential for life is repugnant. And we've got to figure out ways of trying to at least reach out our hand. So that's a challenge for you that I'm leaving with you, is help me, give me phone numbers, give me people to contact and talk about what we could do. I think that we can put together a very simple customer assistance program that does things that just as limited as getting a listing of all of the customers who have extraordinarily high water usage that's higher than what you'd expect for a typical residential customer, and knocking on the door and asking, is there a problem here? Do you have a leaking toilet? Can we do something about that? Can we replace shower heads? Maybe it's a half a day every week that somebody goes and takes a list and tries to deal with it. Just the most limited thing, if nothing else. We want to convey that we care about the people that are impacted about the crisis today, not waiting on the solution that comes about 10 and 15 months down the road. So that's something I want to leave with.
Yeah, let me jump in here right here and just make a statement. One of the action items I would love to come out of this meeting and from this group, I mean, I have a lot of balls in the air, obviously, but you guys know the community. Could we put together a 3-person ad hoc committee from this group or other people from the community who could help, maybe under Eric's direction, find foundations or whatever that could help fund a low-income program? Because we, as Eric said, we can't fund it from other customers within the system. Most other communities, they take from the rich and they give to the poor. We don't have that option here. So I'm not asking for volunteers right now, but put that in your back of your mind, and it's something I think would be really helpful. Go ahead, Eric. We've had 5 meetings. Right. I would love if Alabama Village, when I got here, was #1 priority. I can't fix Alabama Village. Alabama Village has got to be fixed with the city and with the housing authority, and I can help, but I can't fix Alabama Village. Yeah. Right. 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 But it's not that simple. There's 500 property owners in Alabama Village. There's, okay. Well, we can put Alabama Village back on the agenda if you want for the next meeting, but I cannot solve Alabama Village. Right. We have no problem if you guys want to invite the city and the housing authority to the next meeting, or not next meeting, the meeting after that. Uh, it it right. half of it, half of it.
So if they got leaks on their property, they need to go in there and fix, just like they asked the one that live over there to do what they need to do. They need to fix their property. Because Alabama is been put out there wrong. They are not the source of water that's being lost in the city of Princeton. They only is 18% according to what we got on the board from 18%.
It's a it's it right.
Goes to a lot of people that's on this ad hoc committee. There's only a couple of them that were attending meetings, water board meetings at that time that we could speak with and that we did speak with. And so now we have a whole lot of how can I put it, suggestions and a lot of talk. But when Jerry Doyle and myself were at the forefront talking about Alabama Village, before we even got to this point, where we went in our own pockets and hired an attorney, but it fell on deaf ears. So I am tired of the hypocrisy. I'm tired of the plans. Whether or not you see a political future in this, which is your business, but it's time for us to get to the real point. Now, Alabama Village is 18%, and the rest of it is a lot of theft that is going on. And that has been done and being discovered, and is still going on. And so I'm going to continue to trust in God that it's all going to be revealed. There's going to be a lot of shocked people. Miss Franks.
Okay.
All of us cannot talk at one time. Let's listen. Then we'll get to it. All I want to say.
Are you finished? Oh, okay.
All I'm saying is that I'll say that Richard House, they willfully neglect the citizens of Alabama. And I think the report needs to be read up to the district attorney's office, because to willfully neglect the community is prosecuted. Now, I'm here in this meeting, and all I hear is, unfortunately, we're going to go through some bad situations on this. It's like there's no fix at the end. And my biggest thing is, I want to leave something positive for my children. So when I pass on, they have something to work with. I'm not hearing no optimism from you guys. We're paying you a lot of money. This taxpayer, it's not very much. Paying you a lot of money. I understand about the tanks, this, that, and other, but I think there's something that has to be done legally to start prosecuting some people. Because the city is neglecting people. Richard House is neglecting people. All this stuff is, I don't tell nobody say, Richard Water, City of Richard, and Richard House, and love other buildings.
Should I just get it? You just
Something needs to be done legally. The DA office, the attorney general,
okay. Let,
Those new meters that from AMI, every citizen in Princeton does not have those new meters for it to be read back to the company. And then, not only that, when the system broke down, they just sent out meters in the thousands of dollars to people that they know for a fact those new meters is not reading back because the system was broke. So they just charge people what they want to do for 3 months. That system was broke. And it was down for lightning struck. They say lightning struck. But as I say, it's not Alabama Village, the biggest water leak, but everybody wants to say it because that's what they had named it. It's not the village.
okay.
Did we answer your questions earlier?
Right.
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 So, as far as the rates are concerned, okay, we're talking about the possibility of raising rates. Is that
No, we're talking about evaluating what the proper rates are once we determine what the solution is. or the cost could go up.
Okay, well, we're looking at that, and we're looking at fixing the pipes, which would stop the leakage.
But will require significant capital expenditures.
Okay, so my point is, or my question is, when we're looking at raising the rates, how are we looking at raising the rates when we're talking about those things as well? How are we looking at raising the rates or talking about raising the rates when we're talking about possibly lowering our costs?
You know, because the it takes significant capital expenditure to reduce leaks.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're not really talking about reducing
Yeah.
the overall costs.
Yeah. The overall
may
costs are
have
not going to go
less-
down.
You may have less. You may be able to make investments that reduce your O&M expenses, but because your rates currently aren't recovering any capital costs,
Yeah.
you've got a big deficit of capital spending. So in terms of the overall cost picture, you're just trying to get to the point where you're starting to be able to pay for capital.
Mhm.
And even that is going to be a big challenge. And so I honestly think, and I think I can, some of the information I have for you, I think you're going to have to be thinking about differences in just the overall institutional structure of the system. Bottom line is that if you are not able to achieve economies of scale, if you are not able to generate adequate revenues to provide capital spending capacity, you are doomed to failure.
Yep.
And the trouble is, and I have a few slides here that will show you don't have much running room. You just don't have much running room.
Yeah.
So,
Why don't you get onto the heat maps?
Yeah. So let me show you some of this stuff. So again, we talked about this before. How do you measure water affordability? And there's some standard things: percentage of income for the median household customer, percentage of income for low income customers. How much of your income do you have to dedicate to water and wastewater bills? Another logical comparison is well, what do we pay relative to everybody else? So one of the things that's difficult is this on the left is what we sometimes refer to as a heat map. The darker it is, the more people that are in poverty, the more households that are in poverty. You can look at where the Mobile area is generally. Let's zoom in. That's Pritchard and Chickasaw. That would basically be the darkest of the dark areas on that larger map. You have you are a pocket of poverty in this state. You're not the only one, right? We saw this, you see over here, you're not the only ones. There's certainly plenty of poverty elsewhere in the state. But Pritchard in particular is a pocket of poverty in this state. And as a consequence, with your relatively high water bills, you have pretty high burdens. Anything over about 4% is considered pretty highly burdensome, which is basically darker blue. And you're basically all dark blue.
But are we that because we're having to currently pay for water that we're losing?
No.
That's a small factor.
No. It's all of it. Yes, the water losses is a problem, and reducing water losses can improve operating cost efficiencies, but costs a lot of money to fix those water losses. But it's other things. It's just it.
Inefficiency over a long period of time, lack of investment, is the biggest headwind that we have to overcome. It won't happen overnight, and it isn't. And cost of water is a component of it, but because of the lack of spending over the last 30 to 40 years, it's got us to the point where there's so much to spend in such a short period of time that it's the critical breaking point for this component, of which started this slide that we can go door to door and stop the water leakage. Go ask companies and rich people to give us money. We can get free capital, but the headwind is really the capital to make sure you have a long plan, long enough for the next 30 or 40 years, that it doesn't overburden the community, which is with 16.2% poverty right now. That's
Right.
the harder part about it.
Yeah.
So I think
16.
it's going to not be solved with one thing. It's going to have to be a little bit from everywhere if it's solved.
16.2% for the state. Here in Pritchard and Chickasaw, it's about double that.
Yeah,
About
34,
double that.
34%.
So to your question
Yeah.
is that it's not just one thing. You know, all those utility functions that I listed, source of supply, pumping, transmission, distribution, all of those things require economies of scale to realize efficiencies, and you don't have it. And most of those functions have been neglected for years. And there's lots of reasons. And one of the nice things about cost of service rate making, one of the reasons why I sleep a little bit, is it's prospective in nature. When we do rate making, we say, what do we need to be charging next year and the coming years in order to be able to get on a sustainable path? We don't look back as a general rule for purposes of rate making. And I think that that's an important sort of message for how we approach this issue. There's a million good and a million rotten, really rotten reasons for why you got to where you are today. And we can spend hours and days and months and years unraveling, re-raveling, changing the narrative, all the rest of that kind of stuff about what happened in the past. And 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. There's lots of reasons to be angry. There's lots of reasons to be angry, but being angry doesn't solve the problem. So what we have to do is ask ourselves, where are we at today? What are our capacities, and what can we do going forward? I don't discount that at all. And I don't because I don't know your history, but I also don't in any way doubt that you have ample reason to be angry. That's the point. I don't know, and frankly,
I do.
it's not really that important for figuring out at least part of what we need to do going forward. Okay, so yeah.
So is there other ways to address the
Yes.
deficit besides the rate?
Yes. Let me talk to you a little bit about that. Let me talk to you about some of the institutional solutions. So again, you can look at your bills. You can look at what other people in Atlanta pay. In Alabama pay. I've got all these slides are in the deck. We're running out of time, so don't want to go through them all. But basically, you can see you got relatively high bills and higher bills than most people in Alabama, and relatively lower incomes, and so that just again limits your lower incomes, higher bills. It's a bad combination. Okay, give me another example though. Give you another example. These are bills. This is your current bill, annual basis for a 4,500 gallon customer. That's somebody using 4,500 gallons a month in and month out. Simple calculation. You're at just under $1,200 a month, about $100 a month. I know individual people have different bills. This is just for that user. This is just by way of comparison. Let's look at some comparisons. The Moz bill is about $861. And by the way, the Moz bill is a little bit higher than what you see as the median across the entire state. So Moz is very typical of what you see across the state. Your bill is substantially higher, but it's not the highest. It's not the highest. So that you folks that are thinking, well, geez, we already have really, really high bills, it can't go up. Of course it can go up. It's higher down the road in Jefferson County, Alabama, who went through a bankruptcy, defaulted on $3.2 billion in debt, and have come out. It's worse in Atlanta. So when you say, geez, we have really, really high bills and really, really low incomes, and therefore we can't increase rates, not true. Rates can go up still. And in fact, there are places in Jefferson County, and there are places in Atlanta that have the same sort of income distributions that you do. And so they face an even worse burdens. What's different about those two places, though, relative to Jefferson, to the Pritchard system? They're big systems. They're big systems. And I will tell you, because I've helped design them, or I'm in the process of helping design them, they have customer assistance programs. They have programs where they can basically say, we're going to scalp some of those dollars from our utility revenues, or we're going to go out to our communities and we're going to find dollars to help the people that are most impacted by these high bills. Right? Unfortunately, here, you don't have people in your system to be able to do that because of exactly what we showed you, right? Remember that. There is not pocket of wealth to correspond to the pocket of poverty. There are pockets,
Right.
believe me, last time you went to Atlanta, you saw there are plenty of big pockets of wealth in Atlanta, right? You don't have that available to access unless we can talk about a solution to this problem in a more regional perspective. So, customer assistance programs, I think, is one of the things. And again, I'd like to this notion of an ad hoc committee we think is something that's really important. There's lots of different ways of designing these programs. Some of these programs are funded through utility revenues. Eventually, it would be hoped for that you could have that here in Pritchard. But there's so many other claims on your limited operating expense dollars, that's going to be a problem, at least in the short term. So let's look to some short-term solutions that look beyond the Pritchard board, that go beyond the Pritchard system and look at basically seeking help within your regional community in Mobile. All with that promise, and some of the reasons that we wanted to go through this is the information that you give to the Community Foundation or the equivalent of the Mott Foundation, the Joyce Foundation. I'm not familiar with your philanthropic organizations here in this region, but there is a compelling case, especially when you can make the case that this is intended very intentionally as something of a Band-Aid, because I have faith in John. I have faith in what you are doing to lay a foundation here to get back towards sustainability. But in the meantime, we have to take immediate action. So there's lots of different ways of designing these programs. There's lots of different considerations. I left that with you. Where we want to be, where John is working you towards, is a measure of financial sustainability. Sustainability is the watchword, if you will, for utilities. It's the only way that you can run a utility is with recognizing what is necessary to be able to work with your own resources. It's so what we have done in again, I think your situation is more acute. A good starting point is to do it on the basis of a percentage of revenues. I will tell you, in Detroit, the Detroit program was budgeted at 0.5% of system revenues, which generated about $4.5 million. In Jefferson County, Alabama, I think they will be up at eventually around 3-point-something million dollars. Given the other claims on your O&M expenses and so forth, I think that I would approach it differently at this stage. I think that's probably a reasonable objective to get to eventually. But again, I think that again, it's sort of a crisis thing. So let's think about it more in terms of what do we need to try to put some boots on the ground and frankly, toilets in their pickup trucks, replacement toilets in their pickup trucks to just go out, if you help 20 people in a month or 10 people in a month, do that first, right? At hopefully not too much expense. One of the things that we did in Detroit was go and talk to toilet suppliers and said, as a tax write-off, could you give us some basically efficient toilets that we can use? I mean, we need to be creative about how we go and approach folks. I think that it's a compelling thing to say, look, rather than just helping people pay their bills, what we want to try to do is help people control their water use so their bills come down, not that we have to keep paying. So I'd love to be able to have a smaller group be able to talk about what that looks like. I think your math is about right in terms of where you eventually want to be, but you got O&M expenses that are not being met now, so it's hard to add an additional claim. Back to sustainability. We see this in almost all of the stuff that the utility industry talks about. The rate making manuals talk about setting overall level of rates to provide for adequate and sustainable levels for both operating and capital. In the effective utility management
in
manual,
the ad hoc committee.
same thing.
Yeah.
Establish predictable rates, consistent with community expectations, adequate to recover costs, provide for reserves. So, for example, I'll give you a very immediate example for me. I work for Guam. Guam had a typhoon hit about 3 or 4 months ago. I've worked in Hawaii. Maui had the wildfires. Huge costs, right? Systems have stuff happen. You live in a Gulf Coast region that is subject to hurricanes and all the rest of that kind of stuff. To run along without anything basically in the bank, basically having deficits, is a dangerous place. Having some level of reserves, obviously, is down the road, but that's where you need to be. You need to be in a position where you can absorb those shocks. You also have to have adequate financing to basically maintain support from bond rating agencies. Eventually, you're going to need to be able to go back and issue debt. You can understand after the existing debt was defaulted on that you basically do not have access to the capital markets. Now, you've got to prove that you're a viable credit to get back into the credit markets. It's not impossible.
Right.
It's not impossible. Jefferson County just refinanced their debt under considerably better financing terms.
10 years.
And it took about it was 20, but basically a decade.
10 years.
Basically a decade of outstanding utility performance. They do a great job at the Jefferson County Environmental Services Department. New governance structure for the city. Right? Big changes. Program manager for doing the kind of stuff that John is doing. So it is possible to come back from the brink and be a solid utility. It's a long-term proposition.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. One last thing I want to make sure you guys think about. Economies of scale are the watchword for utilities to be able to perform. You have a relatively small system. You are in the middle of an urban region. You are unlike many of the places that don't have economies of scale available to them. If I'm your size and I'm in the middle of rural Alabama or middle of rural Georgia, I got no place to go. You have some place to go. The notion of consolidation and regionalization is something that is widely recognized in the United States as a problem. There are a ridiculous number of water and wastewater systems in our country. We have 50,000 plus water systems in the country. We have under 5,000 electric utilities. There is a water system for every little town, every little burb, just about in the country, and it is fundamentally inefficient. And you are a symptom of just that. And so, but people don't want to give up their water systems, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to consolidate. They don't want to consolidate with their neighbors for whatever reasons. This is true not just here. The stories you're telling me here are stories that have been repeated over and over and over again. This resistance may derive from vested interests. If you run a water system, you also run the procurement department that is awarding contracts for pipe replacements and this and that and the other thing. Let's be honest. There are lots of utilities that basically provide funding for general governments. And so people don't want to give up their water systems. Communities don't want to give up their water systems because they're using those water systems to subsidize somebody else. That's not true here.
Right.
But it is true around the country. In fact, in Flint's water system, as decrepit and underserved and underinvested as it was sending like $18 million a year to the Flint General Fund before the crisis.
Yeah. What was that?
Caused the crisis? Well, I'll talk about that in a little bit. So, examples of ways to get out. Let me give you a couple. There's 3 or 4. There's more actually out there. But I'm really familiar with Detroit. I spent a lot of time in Detroit as under the bankruptcy stuff. And then Jefferson County, right down the road. So Detroit, huge population. Basically, the system was built for 2 million people and achieved economies of scale if I got 2 million customers. But they're now serving about 700,000. So you've got all of that capacity and many fewer people. And like you, those people are poor. 38% poverty rates. Not quite anymore because Duggan has done an amazing job in Detroit. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
So it was the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history at that time. What did it beat out? It beat out Jefferson County, Alabama, in terms of the largest bankruptcies. In Detroit, they defaulted on $5.2 billion in indebtedness. By the way, Puerto Rico's at about 70 billion. And Jefferson County was about 3.2 billion. So big numbers, crazy big numbers. What happened in Detroit? What happened in Detroit? The Detroit Water and Sewer Department served the entire region of Detroit, all the way into Oakland County and Macomb County, all the way out to Flint. If you're familiar at all, Flint is about 50 miles from downtown Detroit. I've driven that highway a million times, it feels like. It's a big, big system. Normally, it would enjoy economies of scale, but for the loss of population. For years and years and years, the people in Oakland and Macomb County basically looked at Detroit and said, you are not running your water and wastewater systems the way you should. We aren't happy with the way you're doing it. You're charging us too much money. In fact, the Flint water crisis came about because Flint said, hey, Detroit's charging us too much money. We want to go elsewhere. Right? So before the Flint water crisis ever happened, they made the decision to leave a regional system that delivers incredibly good quality water. They decided we want to get out. And we all know what happened, or at least the highlights of what happened as a consequence. A well-run regional system that's complying with water quality regulations and it can achieve economies of scale is a great way to get water services. Huh?
Who? No. They have a 30-year contract with Detroit.
Yeah. It'll never happen.
No,
It'll never
happen.
So, importantly, just
Don't
for
believe it.
again, for talking, if you number one, The Great Lakes Water Authority is one of the highest performing water utilities in the country, regional water systems. It does a really good job. Their rates, their credit ratings at the rating agencies are all solid. They have a commitment to limit the rate increases to like 4% in individual years. They are a system that is delivering solid services to their customers. In other words, they were on the brink of disaster, and now they are a sustainable, well-functioning utility.
Okay.
Same thing with Jefferson County. Again, down the road, declared bankruptcy. They put everything together. They got a plan. They just came out of bankruptcy, just refinanced their debt, and are a solid system after 10 years. So there is hope if you are willing to consider and embrace the notion of fundamental change.
Okay.
I think I'm
That's
just
it.
about
I think we just ran out of time. Thanks.
We got it right.
Yeah, we're done.
Okay, so this is all going to come in, be alluded to at least in my write-up of the draft master plan. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. We're going to
Yeah,
post
all the
this
stuff we
at
talked
fixpritchardwater.com. Okay, so everybody will have access to this. So let me just very quickly just summarize. Okay, so next month we're going to do the asset management source of supply. The following month, since I have to have a recommendation of what Pritchard Water is going to look like to the courts in the state by the end of July. Remember that matrix we put up at the last meeting? Ownership, governance, source of supply, operation. We have to finalize how many of those options we're going to look at. Okay, so in June we're going to talk about all of those options. Okay. Okay. Action items from this meeting. I'm going to get the 22 budget, actuals. We're going to post the itemized 24 items on both expenses and revenues, and then just think about who in the community could help us find some money to help with customer assistance program until we can put one together ourselves based on our own revenues. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Flint with the Mott Foundation. I don't think there's a Mott Foundation here, but they were very, very helpful in promoting that program. I could go back to the Motts in Flint and say, would they do something for Pritchard? But anyway, we need to start thinking seriously about, I'm very long-term focused. As Eric said, we need to help some people today, somehow. Okay? Sure.
I know earlier, first time we met, this young lady asked us to meet ourselves, and I was the one who said, I can't go to
Yeah.
that meeting. But the question I have now is, do you expect before July 30th a comprehensive recommendation from this committee or from each individual committee member? And if not, if we do, we need to have at least one meeting or some kind of meeting to decide what it is you want from us.
Well, I mean, yeah. So the question is, how do we do that? So, I need to get from this group how many alternatives you want me to look at. Okay, that's that matrix we talked about at the last meeting. Yeah. So, and then, I'm going to do, based on the results of the asset management study and reading the concession model and all those sorts of things, I with some assistants, are going to do an assessment. I'm going to then bring that assessment to this, this council. If you want to do your own assessments, that's fine. I think you'd better critiquing. I think you better critiquing that.
Yeah, I think she's saying, take what you give us
Yeah.
and allow us to get together and
Yeah.
analyze it, discuss it, and then be
Sure.
able to make a collective
That
recommendation.
was my question.
Yeah.
Is that what you expect, or do you expect Beatrice and her and all of us to do
No.
all of it?
No, I expect to bring you recommendations and the supporting data behind it, you to review it and provide feedback
Collectively.
collectively.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't take individual feedback from 10 people.
That's exactly.
Yeah, the court has asked us to.
Yes.
That's exactly why I ask at this point,
Right.
because we have, 2 months now. We got to get it to. I understand. I just wanted to know where we are headed to trying to develop this?
My feeling is that when we decide which options we're going to look at, we're not going to go to monthly meetings. We may have to have more frequent meetings between the middle of June and the end of July because we cannot do this proper service.
Question
Yeah,
came right now.
yeah.
I know that it's gonna,
The who?
John, what about that,
What?
what she just said?
Okay. Well, that was the hope that this group represents the customers. Okay.
Well, that's why the meetings are open to the public. Anybody can come in and say whatever. We're not, he is.
I'm the one who's responsible for submitting something to the courts and to ADEM by the end of July. I will solicit input and accept input from anybody, but unfortunately I have the responsibility.
Yeah, your city council members, the only person who's appointed is, Ms. Norwood. Yeah, your city council was supposed to have appointed.
Huh?
These are open to the public, right? These meetings are open to the public.
That's correct.
And they did not do their job. Now, check this out, y'all
They
have
did,
to
yeah,
get
Miss,
appointed, right?
yeah, Miss James, Mr. Chickasaw.
So, y'all council person didn't appoint, and then the mayor appointed himself. Okay, so, I mean, a lot of times, put fault in the wrong place. You gotta look at it as, oh, we overlooked this, we overlooked how the district system is more different than any district in the city.
Well, district.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we adjourn the meeting and then we can continue these conversations? Okay? Offline. Okay? Okay. I thank you all for being here. See you next month.
What's the date of that?
It's the third Thursday, whatever that day may be. What?